I always believed that betrayal came like a thunderclap. Loud, chaotic, impossible to miss. But the truth? It arrived in silence. A subtle vibration on my phone at 11:47 p.m. A soft glow across my husband's office screen when I walked in to leave him a late-night coffee. That was it. That's how the world I knew began to collapse. It was a Thursday night in late October. The kind of night when the breeze in Savannah dances through the window like it's trying to tell you something. My husband, Andrew, was downstairs watching a documentary. Something about WWT strategy, ironically. I'd been in the middle of planning our anniversary trip. 14 years. I'd found a secluded resort in Asheville, North Carolina. He always said he loved the mountains. I wanted it to be a surprise. The laptop was left open. Not just open, active. A browser window pulled up to a hotel confirmation page. But not for Asheville. Not for us. My first thought wasn't suspicion. That's what shocks me now. It was confusion, followed quickly by rationalizing. Maybe he was helping someone book a trip. Maybe it was for a client. Maybe it was a mistake. Then my eyes caught something that made the air shift in the room. The guest name. Andrew Bennett. Check-in. Saturday. 2 nights. 1 king bed. I felt my breath pause mid-inhale. I clicked through tabs, each one peeling back a layer of truth I didn't want to see. Email confirmations. A Gmail thread marked S. Dozens of messages. And then photos. A blurry mirror selfie of Andrew kissing someone's neck. The woman was turned away, her hair unmistakably red, vibrant, styled. Sienna. I stared, frozen, at the screen as every neuron in my brain tried to make new logic fit inside old trust. Sienna, my friend, my confidant. The one who once helped me pick out a rug for the hallway and cried to me over her husband Ethan's long work hours. The woman who held my hand when my mother passed away last year. The betrayal wasn't a dagger. It was a slow blade pressing down over months, carving out the truth behind every fake smile, every declined invitation, every running late text. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring, my hand gripping the laptop so tightly my knuckles turned white. My entire body hummed with adrenaline. But outwardly I was still. Too still. From downstairs I heard Andrew call. "Babe, you coming to bed?" I snapped the laptop shut. My voice came out steady, almost sweet. "In a minute. Just finishing up something." I remember thinking, how can I sound so calm when my life has just exploded in silence? That night, I didn't confront him. I climbed into bed, inches away from a man I no longer knew, and stared at the ceiling for hours. I listened to his breathing, steady and slow. And I wondered how many nights he'd done this. Come home from her, taken a shower to rinse off the scent, then slid under the sheets with me. Said, "I love you," with her lipstick still fading on his skin. That was the first night I slept beside a ghost wearing my husband's face. The next morning, I moved through the house like nothing was wrong. I kissed him goodbye, packed his lunch, smiled when he complimented my dress. But inside, something cold and sharp had begun to grow. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want revenge, not the messy, emotional kind. I wanted something else. Clarity, power, control. I called in sick to work. First time in 4 years. I sat in our kitchen, my sanctuary, and pulled out a notebook. I started writing everything down. Dates, details, inconsistencies, lies. I searched deeper, finding phone logs, receipts, even an Instagram account under a fake name they used to share private photos. The more I found, the calmer I felt. People think the worst part of being cheated on is the moment you find out. But it's not. It's the realization that you've been lied to every day. That your whole life was happening alongside someone else's secret movie reel, and you were just the background noise. By noon, I had a complete picture. 8 months, weekly meetups, 2 trips, an apartment lease application with both their names, plans to move in together in the spring. I was shaking, but not from sadness, from the enormity of the lie. Around 2 p.m., I made a call I never thought I would. "Ethan?" I said when he picked up. "It's Maya, Sienna's friend." A pause. "Maya, everything okay?" I swallowed. "I think we need to talk. Privately." There was silence on the line. Then, "I had a feeling," he said quietly. "When and where?" We met that evening at a small, tucked-away wine bar in the historic district. We sat across from each, other like people in a movie scene, both too calm, too still. I handed him a folder. He flipped through it slowly. No drama, no yelling. Just the tightness of his jaw clenching with each page. "She lied to me about everything," he whispered. "They both did," I replied. "We didn't drink much. We didn't need to. We were high on clarity. We have 2 choices," I said. "Blow it all up or, he asked, "show them how it feels when the story gets flipped." His eyes met mine, something electric passing between us. Not attraction. Not yet. Just shared understanding, shared grief, shared betrayal. A plan began forming that night, not out of rage, but out of necessity. The need to reclaim our narrative, to turn their secret into our power. I went home and lay next to Andrew again. This time, I felt nothing. Not hate, not love, just absence. Like he had already moved out of my life emotionally, and I was simply waiting for the body to follow. In the coming days, I played my role, the devoted wife, the unsuspecting friend. Smiling when Sienna texted me, "Miss you, let's do lunch soon," as if she hadn't been planning to replace me. I said yes to everything. I nodded. I smiled. I made a dinner reservation. "You know what I've been thinking?" I told Andrew one night as we folded laundry. "We should have Ethan and Sienna over for dinner. It's been too long." He hesitated, just for a second. "Sure," he said, too quickly. "That sounds great." And just like that, the stage was set. A dinner party. 4 people, 2 marriages, 1 truth. And this time, the lie wouldn't be theirs to control. If you're still here, take a breath. This is just the beginning. What happens next will change everything. If you're as hooked as I was living through this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Your support means the world, and keeps stories like this coming. Now, a little question for you. If you were in Maya's shoes after discovering the affair, what would you have done first? A. Confront them immediately in a heated emotional explosion. B. Stay silent, gather proof, and plan a calculated confrontation. Comment your answer A or B below. I'm curious to see what kind of thinkers you are. There's a strange kind of silence that follows devastation. Not the silence of peace, but a vacuum, where even your thoughts feel like intruders. The days after I discovered Andrew's affair felt like that. I moved through them like someone living underwater, everything muffled, every breath heavy. I went to bed next to him, listened to the lies woven into each goodnight, each casual brush of his hand. I smiled through texts from Sienna, the same fingers that had traced my name now dancing across the keyboard to her. I didn't flinch. I watched. I studied. I learned. What people don't talk about enough is the clarity that can rise out of betrayal. It starts as pain, but slowly, quietly, it hardens into something else. Focus. Resolve. My grief began to crystallize into action. The question wasn't, why did they do this, anymore. It became, what am I going to do with the truth? I kept the folder close to me at all times, the one with screenshots, hotel confirmations, bank charges from boutique stays in Charleston and Atlanta, and one photograph that made my chest burn. Andrew and Sienna, hand in hand, standing in front of a for lease sign on a townhouse near Forsyth Park. My husband had been house hunting with my friend while I planned his birthday dinner. The contrast between the two realities made my stomach twist. The night Ethan and I met at the wine bar had left more than just a shared understanding. It lit a quiet fuse. I remember the way his eyes didn't waver as he read every line of evidence, how he clenched his jaw but never looked away. There was a dignity in his pain that I recognized. We were two strangers with parallel wounds, and we were about to become something more. The next morning, I woke up early and stood by the window in the kitchen, the same window I had looked out of during years of morning coffees and quiet weekend breakfasts. It overlooked the backyard where we'd once hung fairy lights for our 10th anniversary. I stared at it, not with nostalgia, but with precision. I took out my notebook and began building a plan. This wasn't going to be an emotional meltdown. It was going to be a well-executed operation. Ethan and I scheduled a meeting for that Saturday at a quiet corner booth in a tucked-away cafe. We came prepared, me with my notebook, he with a USB drive and a grim sense of purpose. He had been watching too, apparently. Unexplained expenses, long meetings, one incident where Sienna claimed she had a workshop in Tampa, only for Ethan, to see her tagged in a friend's story sipping wine in Charleston. It was all starting to fit. We agreed on a few principles. No chaos, no public scenes, and absolutely no second chances. This wasn't about salvaging the relationships. It was about taking back the story. I don't want revenge, I told him. I want to leave the room with my dignity intact. He nodded. I want to leave it with the truth on the table. No more pretending. We spent the afternoon combing through everything. Timelines, messages, even social media patterns. Ethan had managed to log into their shared cloud account. It was filled with photos of Sienna at events she never mentioned, texts exchanged, late into the night. My favorite moment came when we stumbled upon a calendar invite titled Spring Escape Plan. Just beneath it, lease signing, and a private note from Sienna that read, "Can't wait to wake up next to you every day, finally free. Free." That word echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. She wanted to be free from her husband. He wanted to be free from me. And all the while, they'd smiled at us, toasted our promotions, clapped at our anniversary dinner. But now the script was ours. We decided the dinner would happen in exactly 2 weeks. Enough time to gather everything, to craft the narrative carefully, but not so much time that they'd suspect anything. I picked the date deliberately, the weekend after Andrew's quarterly business review, when I knew he'd want to relax, not deal with any surprises. The location would be our home, familiar ground, controlled space. I'd cater the entire evening under the pretense of a long overdue double date. It would be perfect. I began preparations under the guise of excitement. I ordered new flatware, picked up fresh linens, arranged a floral centerpiece with white lilies and eucalyptus. It was a dinner party, after all, and I had every intention of making it beautiful. Behind the scenes, Ethan and I worked like project managers. We contacted a lawyer, my old college roommate, now a partner at a local firm, who reviewed our evidence and drafted preliminary divorce terms. We discussed outcomes. Ethan was particularly concerned about the custody of their dog, a rescue named Murphy who, in a sick twist, had once bonded with Andrew during a shared picnic. I found myself comforting him over coffee, laughing darkly at how surreal everything had become. There were hard moments, too, ones that caught me off guard. Like the day I found an old love letter from Andrew, tucked into a box of holiday decorations. It was short, dated 6 years ago, and ended with, I don't deserve someone like you, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying. I stared at it for a long time before setting it on fire in the kitchen sink. Not out of spite, but because I needed it gone. I also started therapy, just one session at first, but it helped more than I expected. The therapist asked me, "Who are you now that this has happened?" And the question stopped me cold. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I had spent so much time being a wife, a friend, a planner, a fixer. But who was I beneath the grief? That night, I pulled out a blank journal and started writing again. Not facts or timelines this time, but feelings. I wrote about the guilt I didn't deserve, the anger I'd buried under charm, the fear that I would never trust again. And then, I wrote one sentence that would become my mantra. This does not break me. It remakes me. As the dinner approached, Ethan and I grew closer, not romantically, but as co-conspirators in an emotional rebellion. We shared playlists to stay grounded, swapped quotes we found empowering. I started meditating in the mornings. He took up running. We both needed outlets to hold the weight of what we were about to do. The day before the dinner, I took half the day off work and deep cleaned the house. Not out of hospitality, but out of ritual. I wanted to reclaim every space they had tainted. The living room where they had once shared glances during game night. The guest bathroom where I later found her lipstick in the trash. I lit candles, rearranged books, placed fresh towels. It was my home again, not a crime scene. That evening, Andrew walked in to see me humming as I tested out wine pairings. He looked genuinely pleased. "You're going all out," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I smiled, hiding the chill that ran down my spine. "I want it to be perfect," I said softly. He kissed my cheek. "You're amazing, you know that?" The words no longer meant anything. In bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and imagined how it would go. The looks on their faces, the silence, the shame. I didn't want tears. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted them to finally see themselves clearly, reflected in the evidence we had prepared. I whispered to myself, "This ends on my terms." As I drifted off to sleep, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I was something else entirely. I was ready. Tomorrow, the table would be set, the candles lit, the wine poured, and the truth would be served. Cold, precise, and unforgettable. The day of the dinner arrived cloaked in an unsettling quiet. The kind of silence that feels more like anticipation than calm, like the pause before a storm makes landfall. Savannah was bathed in late afternoon light, casting long amber shadows across the hardwood floors of our home. It was a beautiful day, and I was about to burn the last remnants of a life I'd once cherished. Not with fire, but with precision. I woke up before Andrew. The weight of what I was about to do sat calmly in my chest. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like ceremony, like the final chapter of a story that had written itself in lies. I made coffee, fed the cat, and stood at the sink as I watched the sun creep up over the fence line. Tonight everything would change, and for once, I would be the one writing the ending. Andrew moved through the house that morning like any other Saturday, oblivious. He offered to help with setup, but I politely declined. I didn't want him touching anything. Not the place cards, not the plates, not the wine I had selected with such careful symbolism. I wanted to preserve the space he was about to be confronted in, untouched and sacred. "Do you want me to pick up dessert?" he asked as I chopped herbs. "No need," I replied smoothly. "I've already ordered something special." He kissed my temple, and I had to steady my hand to keep from flinching. "You really are amazing, Maya," he murmured, I nodded and kept my eyes on the cutting board. I spent the afternoon transforming the dining room into something extraordinary. The table, long and rustic with iron legs, was dressed in ivory linen and adorned with flickering gold votives and delicate glass vases filled with white lilies, Sienna's favorite. The irony didn't escape me. I placed 4 hand-lettered name cards at each seat. I polished the wine glasses until they shimmered. Each setting had a folded linen napkin, and beneath 2 of them, under Andrew's and Sienna's, lay carefully printed pages, trimmed and weighted just enough to remain flat. They wouldn't know what hit them until it was far too late. At exactly 6:45 p.m., Ethan arrived. He wore a navy blazer and carried a bottle of vintage Bordeaux, the same one Sienna had once bragged about bringing back from Napa. His face was calm, almost detached, but his eyes were watchful. "You okay?" he asked quietly as I ushered him in. "I will be," I said. "Are you ready?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "Let's finish it." We stood together for a moment in the hallway, the hum of the oven behind us, the low sound of a jazz playlist floating from the living room. It all felt so normal. It was almost cruel. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Andrew jumped from the kitchen stool like he'd been startled. "I'll get it," he offered quickly. But I was already moving. "Relax," I said with a smile. "It's just dinner." When I opened the door, Sienna stood in a silk-wrapped dress far too formal for our usual gatherings. She was flushed, smiling tightly, holding a box from a local bakery. "Maya," she chirped, her voice too high. "So good to see you. I hope we're not too early." I hugged her, noting the rapid beat of her heart against mine. She smelled like expensive perfume and anxiety. "Perfect timing," I said, stepping back to let her in. As she crossed the threshold, her eyes swept the space quickly, assessing. Andrew came forward and greeted her with a stiff hug, avoiding eye contact. Ethan followed, shaking Andrew's hand and offering a polite compliment on the house. And so, the evening began. We made our way to the living room, where drinks were poured and small talk was exchanged like currency. I watched the body language, how Andrew and Sienna sat farther apart than usual, how they avoided looking directly at one another. The tension was so thick I could almost taste it, but no one broke the illusion. Ethan played his role to perfection. He asked about Andrew's work, complimented Sienna's shoes, made light conversation about the city's latest restaurant openings. I floated between them, the gracious host, topping off glasses and laughing in all the right places. I watched Andrew fidget. I watched Sienna sip her wine too quickly. The charade lasted through appetizers and into the main course. Roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, grilled vegetables, wild rice pilaf. Comfort food dressed in elegance. It was a quiet act of rebellion, feeding the people who had starved my marriage of honesty. At one point, Andrew caught my eye and smiled, the familiar curve of his lips one I had once loved. I held his gaze, steady and expressionless, and he looked away first. When the plates were cleared, I stood and wiped my hands on a linen towel. "Sienna, would you mind helping me with dessert?" I asked. She jumped slightly. "Oh, sure," she said, setting down her glass. In the kitchen, she leaned against the counter as I removed the box of chocolate mousse cakes from the fridge. "Everything's delicious, Maya," she said. "Really, you've outdone yourself." I didn't reply at first. I placed 4 plates on the counter, unboxed the cakes, and began transferring them one by one. When I finally spoke, my voice was low. I wanted tonight to be memorable. She blinked, sensing the shift. "Is everything okay? You seem different." I placed the final cake on the plate and lifted my eyes to hers. "I've been different since the day I found out about you and Andrew." The color drained from her face. Her hand shot out to the counter for balance. Maya, don't, I said, still calm. Don't insult me with lies. I've seen everything, the texts, the photos, the lease application, the note about waking up next to each other. 8 months, Sienna. She looked like she might faint. He said he was going to leave you. He said, I cut her off again. You'll have a chance to say it all. To your husband, too. Her eyes widened. Ethan knows? I gave her a cold smile. He's had a very enlightening week. I picked up the tray and walked out. Coming? I called over my shoulder. Back in the dining room, Ethan and Andrew looked up as we entered. Andrew's smile faltered as he saw Sienna's face. She was pale, trembling. Ethan sat calmly, swirling the wine in his glass. I placed each plate down, slowly and deliberately. Then I returned to my seat. Before we dig in, I said softly, I thought we might talk about honesty. Andrew looked confused. Maya, what? Go ahead, I said, gesturing to his plate. Look underneath. He hesitated, then slowly lifted the napkin beneath the dessert. His face froze. Sienna didn't move until Ethan picked up her plate and placed it directly in front of her. You should see yours too, he said. Sienna's hands trembled as she unfolded the page. I watched the tears rise in her eyes, the breath catch in her throat. Maya, Andrew said finally. This is ridiculous. You went through my private things? I stared at him. You planned a life with someone else while living in mine. Don't talk to me about privacy. Ethan leaned back in his chair. You two thought you were writing the story, he said. Turns out we were just waiting for the right chapter. Andrew stood suddenly, pushing his chair back. Can we talk privately? He asked me. This is between us. I shook my head. No, this involves all 4 of us. So we'll all hear the truth together. And for the next 2 hours, that's exactly what happened. We asked questions and they answered. We laid bare every hidden truth. The affair, the apartment, the bank account, their plans to leave us and build a new life. It was not explosive, it was surgical. Every detail exposed, every lie unspooled. And when the truth lay naked on the table, Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Divorce papers, he said. We've both come prepared. Andrew looked at me in shock. You've been planning this? Not as long as you were, I replied. They didn't sign that night, but they would, because for the first time, they understood what it meant to lose control. That night, after they left, separately, I stood in the quiet of the dining room. The candles had burned low. The plates were half full. The wine bottles were empty. And yet, the house felt full of something new. Not peace, not yet, but truth. Finally, truth. And that was enough for now. There's a kind of silence that follows a storm. It's not peace. Not yet. It's the aching stillness where every object remains intact, yet nothing feels the same. That was the house the next morning. A house scrubbed clean of illusion, yet haunted by the weight of what had finally been spoken aloud. Andrew had left quietly, taking only a small overnight bag and the dignity he could gather. Sienna followed minutes later, mascara streaked down her cheeks, shoes in her hand, walking barefoot to her car. Ethan and I didn't speak much as we watched them go. There was nothing left to say. The damage had been done, and the reckoning had arrived. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anxiety, but because my mind had grown too used to tension. It didn't know how to rest now that the climax had passed. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been a marriage and a friendship. Dessert plates with melted mousse still clinging to porcelain. Empty wine glasses. A linen napkin folded too perfectly, like a performance that no longer mattered. In the morning, I began to clean. Not with frenzy, but with intention. I cleared the table, loaded the dishwasher, wiped each surface slowly. There was a strange therapy in that. The physical act of erasing their presence from my home. When I opened the windows, the breeze felt different, as if the air itself had changed now that the truth had passed through it. The week that followed became a blur of small, deliberate acts. I changed the locks. Not because I thought Andrew would return, but because I needed the symbolism. I notified the bank, separated our accounts, met with the attorney again to finalize the documents we'd prepared. Every step was another brick, laid in the path away from who I had been. Friends started to reach out as whispers of what had happened rippled through our social circles. I didn't offer drama, no monologues, just facts. Yes, Andrew and I are divorcing. He had an affair with Sienna. Yes, Ethan and Sienna are separating too. Some were stunned into silence. Some responded with awkward sympathy. A few asked probing questions that thinly veiled their curiosity as concern. I didn't indulge them. This wasn't a scandal. It was a rebirth, and I wouldn't let it be reduced to gossip. Andrew tried calling twice. Both times I watched the phone ring and fade to voicemail. His messages were rehearsed and predictable. Can we talk? Let's meet for coffee. 12 years together deserves more than this. That line, ironically, almost made me laugh. He wanted fairness. Fairness after months of secret meetings and shared hotel rooms. Fairness after watching me plan his birthday while he planned a future with someone else. I responded only once. All communication will go through the attorneys. The next day, I moved into a temporary rental in the historic district. A small apartment above a bookstore, where the scent of old paper floated up the stairs and through my windows. It was nothing like the house Andrew and I had built together. And that was the point. I didn't want familiar. I wanted new. I bought secondhand furniture, choosing pieces that didn't carry history. I painted the walls myself. Sage green in the living room, soft cream in the bedroom. I slept alone for the first time in over a decade and found comfort in the silence. No lies, no secrets. Just the hum of my own thoughts, unfiltered and finally honest. I started a kickboxing class on Tuesday nights. There was something deeply satisfying about hitting a heavy bag with everything I had buried for months. Rage, grief, fear. All of it came out in jabs and hooks, sweat and breathlessness. I didn't talk much to the other women in the class at first, but slowly, between stretches and cool-downs, we began to share stories. Not just about betrayal, but about strength, endings, new chapters. Ethan and I kept in touch, but from a respectful distance. There was no rush to redefine our bond. Sometimes, trauma wants to shape itself into love just because of proximity and shared pain. We knew better. We had both lost something enormous, and we weren't about to lose ourselves in the aftermath. We met once a week, usually for coffee or a walk through Forsyth Park. He told me about Murphy, their dog, now living with him full-time. He confessed he still had trouble sleeping, that he often woke up expecting to hear Sienna's voice in the kitchen. "I don't miss her," he said one afternoon, tossing a stick for Murphy. "I miss the version of her I thought was real." I understood that better than I could say. I missed the idea of Andrew, the man who held my hand at my mother's funeral, who brought me soup when I had the flu, who danced with me barefoot in the kitchen on lazy Sunday mornings. But that man didn't exist. Or if he did, he had vanished somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who could smile at me with secrets in his pocket. I began journaling again. Not timelines or facts, but raw thoughts. Pages and pages of uncertainty, sadness, sometimes surprising humor. I wrote about the fear of starting over at 38, about the pleasure of doing things without compromise. I'd always considered myself strong, but this version of me was sharper, clearer, less afraid. One night I received a text from an unknown number. It was Sienna. "Maya, I know you'll probably never forgive me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, truly. I never meant to hurt you." I stared at the message for a long time. I never meant to hurt you. The words echoed hollow. Intent doesn't erase impact. She had looked me in the eye while dismantling my life from within. She had sat at my table, praised my cooking, hugged me with the same arms she wrapped around my husband. What did her apology matter now? I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a bottle of wine and toasted myself. Not for surviving, but for choosing to walk through the fire with my head held high. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. And that was more than enough. About a month after the dinner, Ethan and I met again. Not a date, just a check-in. We shared a booth at a quiet bistro, ordered too much food, and laughed more than we expected to. "How are you really doing?" he asked, as he poured me a second glass of wine. I thought for a moment. "Lighter," I said. "Like I've been carrying a weight for so long, I didn't even realize it was there. And now it's gone." He smiled. "That's exactly it. We didn't speak about Andrew or Sienna much that night. We spoke about books, about travel, about where we might go now that the future was no longer tethered to someone else's expectations. We sat in silence for a while, a peaceful one this time, the kind that only comes after surviving a storm and realizing you're still standing. I realized something else too. I was becoming someone I liked, not a reflection of a wife or a best friend, but Maya, complex, unapologetic, whole. The silence that filled my life now was no longer absence, it was space. Space to breathe, to think, to rebuild. The kind of silence that doesn't haunt, but heals. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just believe in new beginnings. I was living one. 3 months after the dinner, the divorce was finalized, with a whisper instead of a bang. No courtroom drama, no last-minute resistance. Just a quiet meeting with attorneys, a few signatures, and a stack of papers that officially ended 14 years of marriage. Andrew signed everything without contest. He never challenged the terms. Maybe he knew better. Maybe he understood that any fight would only further unravel the image he'd tried to preserve for so long. Or maybe he just didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. I didn't attend the final signing in person. My attorney handled it on my behalf. I spent that morning walking the bluff at Tybee Island, watching the ocean repeat its rhythm without pause or apology. The wind was cool, the sky streaked with soft pink and orange. It struck me that even in endings, there was beauty. Not long after, I sold the house. I'd considered keeping it for a moment, a symbol of victory, of what I had reclaimed. But the truth was, it wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of ghosts, echoing with old laughter that now sounded hollow. I didn't want to live among the shadows of who we had been. So I let it go. I bought a small craftsman-style house closer to downtown, walking distance from parks and cafes and a quiet yoga studio I had begun visiting. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Every color on the wall, every piece of furniture, every framed photo, it all belonged to this new version of me. Maya Bennett. Not the wife of someone, not the friend to someone else's deception, but simply a woman beginning again. The day I moved in, I sat on the floor with a pizza box and a glass of wine, surrounded by unopened boxes and soft music playing from my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed in the stillness and said out loud, "This is where it starts." Ethan and I remained in touch, though we saw each other less. We had both needed that connection in the early aftermath, like two survivors on the shore after a shipwreck. But as the waves calmed, we realized we had different paths to walk. He threw himself into work, took a sabbatical, and traveled out west. I cheered him on from afar. We still sent each other updates now and then. Photos of Murphy, quotes that made us think, music recommendations. There was no bitterness, no distance born of avoidance. Just mutual understanding that healing sometimes means letting go of even the ones who helped you heal. Sienna moved to Austin. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she took a position at a boutique design firm and was trying to start fresh. I wondered what starting fresh looked like for someone who had built so much of her life on borrowed truths. I didn't feel anger anymore when her name came up. I felt a kind of detached curiosity, like remembering a character from a novel I'd long since finished reading. Andrew was staying with his brother for a while. Eventually, he rented a small condo across town. I hadn't seen him since the day of the dinner, until one Saturday in spring when I ran into him at a coffee shop. He looked thinner, older, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. His hair was grayer at the temples, his posture a little less confident. He smiled when he saw me. It wasn't the smile I used to know. It was tentative, unsure. "Maya," he said, clearly surprised. "You look good." I thanked him and smiled politely. There was no spark of old warmth, no bitterness either, just space. Time had carved a canyon between us. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm okay," I said, which was true. I wasn't spectacular. I wasn't devastated. I was steady, and that was more than enough. He looked down at his coffee. "I miss you sometimes." I studied him for a moment, the man I had once chosen to build a life with. "I don't miss you," I said honestly. "I miss who I thought you were." He didn't flinch. He nodded slowly, the weight of my words settling between us. "I deserve that," he said. "It's not about what you deserve, Andrew. It's about what I needed to walk away from." I walked out with my coffee and didn't look back. That was the last time I saw him. In the weeks that followed, I began shaping a life that was truly mine. I left my job at the event planning firm, where I had spent nearly a decade managing other people's dreams, and opened my own boutique brand. Not weddings or galas, but curated, intentional gatherings, small dinner parties, retreats, community, workshops for women navigating major life changes. I called it Reclaim the Table. It wasn't just about food or aesthetics. It was about voice, ownership, truth. I wanted to create spaces for people to say, "This is where I begin again." The work didn't feel like work. It felt like purpose. Every table I set, every candle I lit, every place card I wrote, I was rebuilding something that had been broken, not just in me, but in the people I served. I changed my hair, not out of cliché, but because I looked in the mirror one day and didn't want to see the woman who had been betrayed. I wanted to see the woman who had survived, who had rebuilt, who had chosen grace over chaos. I cut it shorter, sharper, more defined, just like me. Some nights, I still heard echoes, memories knocking at the edge of sleep, a moment of laughter that wasn't real, a lie I hadn't seen coming. But they didn't sting like they used to. They just passed through. I let them come. I let them go. One evening in early summer, I hosted a dinner for a group of women I'd been mentoring through a local nonprofit. They were survivors of different kinds: divorce, loss, career upheaval. We gathered in my backyard under string lights, the table set simply but intentionally. As we toasted to each other, I realized that the dinner I'd once orchestrated to reveal betrayal had taught me something deeper: that the most powerful tables are the ones where truth is welcome, where women sit in their full stories, unashamed and unafraid. Someone asked me that night if I regretted how I had handled everything. If I wished I had screamed, thrown things, made a scene. No, I said. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted to reclaim my life without letting someone else's dishonesty turn me into someone I'm not. There were nods of understanding. We all carried our own betrayals. But we were there, at the table, together, and that mattered more than the past ever could. Sometimes when I walk through the city and past places that used to hold meaning, our old brunch spot, the bookstore where Andrew and I used to pick out novels, I didn't feel pain. I felt presence, my own, unmistakable, unyielding, alive. Because betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. And as I sat in my new home, a glass of wine in hand, the moonlight streaming through the kitchen window, I smiled. Not because I was over it, not because I was healed in some tidy, complete way, but because I was exactly where I was supposed to be. No longer searching for closure in someone else's eyes. No longer writing chapters in a story I didn't author. This was mine now. All of it. Maya Bennett's story began with silence. A quiet betrayal, softly discovered through a glowing laptop screen on an otherwise ordinary night. From that single moment of revelation, her world, carefully constructed over 14 years of marriage, collapsed in on itself. But what makes Maya's journey unforgettable isn't the betrayal itself. It's what she did with it. She didn't scream. She didn't self-destruct. She didn't chase answers from people who had already made their decisions in secret. Instead, Maya turned inward. She observed, gathered evidence, and partnered with Ethan, the other betrayed spouse, to plan a confrontation that was as deliberate as it was unforgettable. That infamous dinner, served with wine and chocolate mousse, also came with a serving of truth that neither Andrew nor Sienna could escape. Maya chose dignity over drama. She didn't just expose the affair, she exposed the calculated choices that her husband and friend had made over months. She flipped the script. While they expected tears and chaos, she handed them legal documents and consequences. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Her calm wasn't detachment. It was power. In the weeks and months that followed, Maya didn't simply recover. She rebuilt. She left the home that had become haunted with betrayal and found a new place that reflected who she was becoming. She turned inward to explore her pain, but didn't let it define her. Therapy, kickboxing, journaling, and reconnecting with herself became tools for healing. Ethan, too, was part of her healing journey. But their connection never rushed into something romantic. They knew better than to mistake, shared wounds for compatibility. Instead, they honored what they gave each other: truth, support, and space. By the time Maya finalized her divorce, she had done something far more significant than end a marriage. She had reclaimed her agency. She wasn't just Andrew's wife anymore. She was her own woman. She launched a business built around empowering others, hosting curated dinner events for women navigating transitions. She called it Reclaim the Table, not because it was catchy, but because it captured the essence of her experience. Sitting across from the truth, naming it, and deciding who you want to be after the silence breaks. The run-in with Andrew at a coffee shop months later wasn't the beginning of a new chapter. It was the perfect punctuation mark to a sentence that no longer needed revising. She didn't miss him. She missed who she thought he was. And that, perhaps, was the most liberating truth of all. Maya's story teaches us that pain is inevitable, but the way we respond to pain defines us far more than the pain itself. She didn't allow herself to be cast as the victim in someone else's drama. She became the author of her own new beginning. The lesson at its core: Maya's story is about reclaiming your power. Betrayal often makes people feel powerless. It steals not just trust, but agency, clarity, and confidence. But Maya reminds us that we can choose our response. We can choose to pause, to plan, and to act from a place of strength rather than reaction. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about allowing your pain to inform you, not destroy you. It's about giving yourself the gift of a calm mind when the world wants to see you unravel. And it's about understanding that sometimes the most profound form of revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's choices shape your future. So how do we apply Maya's lesson to our lives? By honoring our instincts, by listening to the quiet truths that surface when we stop explaining away our discomfort, by choosing boundaries over chaos, by allowing endings to be sacred, even if they are painful, and most of all, by understanding that the most important relationship we will ever have is the one we cultivate with ourselves. Whether you've faced betrayal or are simply navigating your own season of change, ask yourself, what would it look like to reclaim your table? What truths need to be served in your life right now? Because dignity, clarity, and strength, they're always on the menu. We just have to choose them. Let's hear from you. If you were in Maya's shoes, what do you think is the most powerful move she made? A. Confronting Andrew and Sienna with calm precision during the dinner. B. Walking away after the betrayal without ever seeking confrontation. Comment your answer. A or B down below. We'd love to see what you think. Also, we want to hear your perspective. Do you agree with how Maya handled the betrayal? Would you have done something differently? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can all learn from each other. If you found this story powerful, moving, or even just thought-provoking, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps us going and allows us to bring you more stories that go beyond the surface, stories that challenge, inspire, and reflect real human experiences. Until next time, take care of your heart. And remember, the most powerful stories are the ones where we rise,